So let's introduce our experts and special guests. If you've been part of our webinars before, you may already know Katie Tamony. Katie's official title is Chief Marketing Officer, but she really is our Chief Storyteller and Trend Spotter at Monrovia. Katie has more than 25 years of experience in lifestyle and leisure industries, and she's the former editor of Sunset Magazine. Katie is a longtime avid gardener with specific interests in the connections between garden, art, health, and well-being. Hello, Katie.
Good morning.
Many of you may also know Georgia Clay. Georgia is the new plants manager at Monrovia, which means she's our go-to plant expert. In her role, she works with breeders and plant finders from around the world to bring in new plants to market for Monrovia. Part of her job includes trialing and testing new plant varieties, and these trials can take several years before the new plants are available at your local garden center. Hi, Georgia.
Hi, Kathleen.
We also have two special guests with us today. I'm happy to introduce you to Debra Prinzing. Debra is a nationally known writer, speaker, and advocate for domestic and locally grown flowers. She's authored more than 11 books, including Slow Flowers Journal, and she's the founder and producer of slowflowerscom, an online directory supporting American-grown farms, florists, shops, and design studios. Hello, Debra.
Hey, Kathleen, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you. I'd also like you to meet Robin Avni. Robin is co-founder and creative director of Bloom Imprint, a publishing company dedicated to showcasing the slow flowers lifestyle. Robin is an award-winning content developer with a special focus in gardening and design. She has produced 18 books, including collaborating with Debra to create Bloom Imprint. Hi, Robin.
Good morning.
Now that we all know each other, I'm going to hand it off to Katie to kick things off.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen. Well, it does feel like a garden party today, and we are all excited to talk about color. Oops, I'm jumping right ahead. But let's start, as Kathleen said, with a poll. So what shapes our preferences for color, and are they different in the outdoors versus, the indoors? One of the leading kind of arbiters of color is Pantone. They always release their new color of the year. And this year they decided for 2023, the color is Viva Magenta. And where did they get that idea? Where did that come from? Robin, you want to tell us a little bit about how they arrived at that color?
Well, sure. Pantone is saying that this is an unconventional shade for an unconventional time. And what they mean by that is they're making a reference to artificial intelligence and the metaverse with this color, because they feel that this color has a glow of the computer screens and the phone screens that we all spend so much time looking at. But it's also has, a little bit of nature flair worked in there. But they generated this program with this color with AI. And also just want to make you can generate your own colors and flower arrangements and florals on a program called DALL-E 2, DALLE-2, which will do a mashup of all sorts of photographs. It's a lot of fun to play with. So I invite you to go online and give that a try and step into the metaverse a little bit there.
Interesting. That's kind of scary and interesting.
Yes,
AI can shape our trend toward color. Well, let's get into how we feel about magenta, because I think, it depends on context. So this is where our poll comes in. Are you someone that really likes magenta paired with white for kind of a clean, crisp look? Or do you like magenta and chocolate, maybe more dark and sensual, or magentas and brights, like the image of the flower arrangement, I just showed? Which is more appealing to you? How would you use it, either outside in the garden or indoors? Wow, the poll is really showing that it's, pretty even.
Well, I would add while we're waiting is that nature is the best color generator of all. So even though you can generate with computer, what you're seeing here really illustrates that the color exists in nature for us.
So we have about 400 responses so far. And I would say magenta and white and magenta and bright are just about tied, which is pretty interesting. That image in the upper left corner was actually AI generated. I'm going to end the poll there, share results. Oop. Okay, so it's 39% magenta and white, magenta and bright is 38%, and magenta and chocolate 23%. So I think we're all, maybe yearning for brightness, right? Given that we're at the beginning of spring. So let's get into what we're going to see today. Today, we're going to talk about color and trends and how to make the most of these palettes in your garden, in containers, and even in floral arrangements. Every year, Monrovia creates landscape palettes that are based on our research with our subscribers, as well as what we see happening in landscape design, plant breeding, garden photography, even the style makers and influencers in other parts of our lives, such as travel destinations, home design, even fashion. After all, we don't garden in a vacuum. Our outdoor spaces are creative spaces that make us feel connected and relaxed, where we can entertain and enjoy. So it's natural that we're looking at trends from other parts of our lives. That's one of the reasons that we asked Debra and Robin to join us to share their insights about trends that are crossing over from home into garden. And we'll talk about the trends that we're all seeing. And then Georgia will share the plants you can grow to create beautiful cutting gardens, refresh your landscape, or just create a special container that really feels right for the season. So let's jump in with our first palette. Oh no, actually, before we talk about palettes, I wanted to get a background from Robin and Debra about how they think about trends, and then we'll talk about our first palette. So turning it over to you both.
Thank you.
I'll jump in and just say, first of all, thank you so much for including Robin and me and Bloom Imprint and Slow Flowers in this deep dive into color trends for 2023. We do an annual Slow Flowers forecast, which is an important gauge for the flower industry, flower farmers and floral designers. But we know that that crosses over so much into the floral marketplace. And, we look at cultural shifts and notable changes and ideas that impact gardening and flower enthusiasts and consumers in general. So you'll hear a little bit of our thinking, and some of it dovetails with what Monrovia is showing.
Yeah, and I will just say that what you see on the right there is what we're calling the opposite ends of the spectrum. It's a veritable rainbow this year. Every paint company comes out with their color of the year. And as you can see, Viva Magenta is actually very much an outlier. What we're seeing are these very rich, saturated hues that are beginning to happen. And we look at that as Duval Kitchens. Some of you may be very familiar with their show on HGTV, but these color palettes have influenced everybody. Everybody is imitating these color palettes, particularly even Farrow and Ball. They haven't had new colors in 5 years, and they just brought out 11 new colors that, if you match up the palettes with Duval, are very similar. So you can really see that influence. And it's no doubt to us that the color palettes are really moving away from what we would call safe creams, whites, and beiges. And there's been a too long obsession with those various shades of gray. And we feel, given the way the universe at large is, with the pandemic lifting a little bit, that there's also a bit of a recession fears, that there's also that, just a general wanting to burst out of what has been happening the past 3 years and to add a bit of brightness and saturation and deep color into our lives.
Wow. Well, and as Debra said, we are seeing a convergence of what you're seeing, in home, and some of the, paint and flower arranging industries with what we're seeing in landscape design. And so we've been doing a little bit of talking amongst ourselves the last month to show you 5 palettes today that we think can really help inform your garden design this spring. So first, let's talk about Sunkissed Cottage as a palette. So this is really rooted in the return to nostalgia and romance that we've been talking about for a while. That center image there is Joanna Gaines's garden from Magnolia. I think she really has a very wonderful way of expressing this feeling. And it's a color palette that is peach and golden and very warm, which I think gives that nostalgic romance look a kind of a youthful feel to it, honestly, and that sort of, warm brightness that we all crave. And on the home side, some of the trends that you're seeing, Robin and Debra, really kind of correspond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this as kind of a natural, practical beauty, right? That's very rooted in just what is outside your door. And we have a vintage reference here, which is McCoy pottery, which looks like it was pulled right from Joanna Gaines's garden, but actually is quite an old piece. And then we put a reference, and this is a photo, that luscious pink cake against those beautiful little pots of color are from our new book, which is called Furrow and Flower. And it's all about a more simpler lifestyle, embracing homesteading, family recipes, and just a more relaxed time. And we see that showing up and transferring even to, pottery and artwork. Flowers have always been a part of that for sure. But when you see something like Ron Nicole, who is now become a very high-end artist who does plaster impressions of natural flowers. And then you see that replicated not only in Magnolia, but other products all over. This cottage aesthetic is there. It's comforting.
Yeah, I would say this palette is a reflection of this overall plant-based lifestyle narrative that we've identified for 2023 as consumers. We all know we're seeking more connections with earth and nature and lessons drawn from the environment, but we're kind of looking at it through the lens of being rooted and finding all of our answers in the plant kingdom. The arrangement that you see on the lower part of the screen is a beautiful floral and foliage and fruit arrangement by Melissa Mercado Dinky of Campanula Design Studio. And we just thought that the palette really played into this Sunkissed Cottage vibe quite well. You notice it's not pastel. It's got some color infusion in it.
Well, let's talk about how we can get that color infusion into the garden. So Georgia, take us through some of your selections.
Yeah, of course. So, the number one with this is this cottage style, and roses really play into that style super well. So I chose this Bubbly Ude Perfume Rose, which is perfectly sun-kissed yellow. We talked about tea stained with this sort of palette here. So we really love the color of this flower. We also love that the whole perfume series is exceptionally fragrant. And has those gorgeous high petal count flowers. So one of the things, often the more fragrant the rose and the higher the petal counts, the more disease prone they are in the landscape. And that's often why fragrance is missing from those new rose introductions that you see year after year. Luckily, we have been noticing that trend and have been working with breeders for many years now to counteract and find roses that are not only super disease resistant and low maintenance, but have that exceptional fragrance and high petal count. So really excited to be able to bring this to market this year, which is the first year we're offering it. And then next is Strawberry Shake, which is a paniculata hydrangea. This is another improvement on the classic cottage shrub in these beautiful white, maturing to this blush pink flower. The flowers are quite large, and what's really nice about Strawberry Shake is that they're held on sturdy stems that are going to support the flowers well. So there's not a lot of need to stake and tie that in the garden. Again, lower maintenance for you. Also wonderful cut flowers, of course. And then next to that is Ostacade Daybreak, which is an African daisy, another ode to those sun-kissed sunset colors here with the flowers. What I love about Ostacade in particular is that it continues to flower throughout the heat of the summer. Many, many African daisies will stop blooming when it gets hot outside, but these will just continually bloom throughout the season. And then, of course, in a garden, evergreen shrubs are very, very important. So I chose this new Orangina vaccinium. This has beautiful evergreen dark foliage, but on the outer tips, you get those gorgeous sunlit oranges and yellows. And in the fall and winter, they turn to more of these dramatic shades of red, which is also really nice. So wonderful evergreen shrub. Think of this as a boxwood replacement. Sometimes that name vaccinium can get rather confusing. They think blueberry edible, but this is a interesting species of plant brought to us from Dan Hinckley, our plant explorer, and it's really a great evergreen shrub. And then moving on now to more of the texture and movements with this little bunny dwarf fountain grass. I really love this particular selection because it's a true dwarf. It's going to top out at about 12 inches tall. Those gorgeous golden blooms, of course, fit this color, and that tiny size makes it super, super versatile in the garden or in a container. And then lastly, Siren Song, Orange Delight Heuchera. Heuchera, of course, are wonderful for adding pops of color with its foliage. I really love this variety because they're a little more heat tolerant than some of the others. And I also love that the flowers are held on these shorter flower spikes, which in turn give you the ability to enjoy them. They don't flop over right away like a lot of Heuchera varieties do. So you get to really enjoy those yellow flowers. Although dainty, they are very beautiful.
And I love the mix of textures and, the different sizes of blooms you have here. There's really a pretty extensive palette in the Sunkissed Cottage idea. Second palette that we're very excited about is what we're calling Pollinator Punch, this very juicy kind of color palette. The garden in the middle there is designed by Homestead Collective. And I think it really represents this idea of the garden of abundance that we've been talking about for a while, where you're blending edibles and pollinator plants in the landscape, not just in raised beds, but really as beauty and sculpture, on their own as plants. And in this color palette, pinks and oranges and purples really live harmoniously together. And I think sometimes people can be a little bit afraid to use a lot of brights, but when you really have a mass of all these pollinators together, it's really quite stunning and can be really beautiful. And then on the, the spectrum in home and other parts of garden, this idea that edibles are really growing in appeal, not just in the place that they're taking in our gardens, but in other ways that we're using them. Debra, are you finding that as well?
Yes, in fact, one of our insights, our most popular insight really for 2023 is called Incredible Edibles. And we know that not everyone eats the flowers they grow. We certainly can eat with our other senses. We eat with our eyes. And we are really seeing that edible ornamentals are like we're seeing on the screen here, and that Georgia will show us are really just also perfect for pollinators. So I love this mashup. We also, when we surveyed our members, we found that 25% of our flower farmers are growing plants for aromatherapy and wellness products. So they're also kind of that carryover into other health benefits. Right. But I know Robin has some insights specifically about the popularity of edible flowers.
Well, right. And I'll just jump in here and say that you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, Gloria Stern. Some of you may have caught her on a recent Shark Tank, which was just launched this season. And she got funding for her business called Eat Your Flowers. And so Barbara Corcoran jumped in and funded her. But Laura is she's pretty savvy. She has a book that's about to launch on this, and she gets all sorts of coverage everywhere. But we see this as just an indication. There are several books, of course, on edible flowers, but we see this as an indication of really showing up in restaurants, on home plates, in our baking, in our drinks and our cocktails and all of those things. So we just wanted to make an important note of that.
Yeah, I think that this idea of having your garden really be this productive space, and the interest that people have in both attracting pollinators and growing their own food is really growing. So that leads us to plant choices. Georgia, take it away.
Yeah, well, you know, you guys sort of alluded to this. There are so many ways to utilize this style in the garden, whether it be edibles and pollinators. But one of the classics for pollinator plants, of course, is echinacea. And there are a ton of echinaceas on the market. We have trialed hundreds of them. I hesitate to say all, but it might be all of them. I'm not sure. And we love the punchy, bright orange color on this Prima Ginger, which is a newer one that's come out from Terra Nova Nursery. The color on this, how intense it is fabulous. Also the sheer amount of blooms, and of course the habit. So echinacea is another one of those plants that often get floppy and you need to stake it and tie it. But this really has robust, lush, healthy foliage and flower stems that are super sturdy and do not flop. So as we know, more flowers means more nectar and pollen for the pollinators, which is always a good thing. And then in the middle here, Monarda is another wonderful pollinator plant, or bee balm. Bee balm is one of those varieties that often can be plagued with powdery mildew and again get very tall. And so breeding work for these is really focused on disease resistance and scaling that down, the size down. So balmy does that beautifully. It has much better resistance to powdery mildew and a habit that's about 12 inches tall. So great for those containers or the smaller size gardens. And of course, that vibrant pink flower is beautiful. Agastache is one of my personal favorite pollinator garden plants. It's a favorite of hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees as well. Morello is of my favorite genus. Morello is one of my favorite varieties. It has these extra large, really deep pink flowers and a ton of them. I also really love the foliage on this plant. Often Agastache is all about the flowers, but this foliage is really gorgeous. It's really quite dark, and then it gets even darker as the temperatures cool into the fall. So you get a lot of different points of interest on this plant. And then, of course, Debra, you mentioned aromatherapy, and lavender is a classic aromatherapy addition to the garden. There are, again, many types of lavender to choose from, of course, but I really love Phenomenal, which is a French lavender. This is noted really for its exceptional cold hardiness and its ability to tolerate heat and humidity, which can often plague lavender heavily. Edibles also, you guys touched on edibles and those fit really nicely here. Superlicious Blackberry is a new compact thornless blackberry. And although it's compact, it still produces a lot of these large berries with beautiful, great flavor. We have been seeing really good fruit production throughout the country, even in areas with low chill, which can often have some issues seeing berries on their plants, including Southern California. And Bountiful Blue, lastly, is a fantastic blueberry bush that not only produces a large crop of berries, but is a beautiful ornamental shrub, especially as people look at planting containers or they have a smaller space to plant. Real estate is really key here. And so if we can choose plants that do more than one thing, that's always going to be great. So this acts as not only an ornamental plant when not in berry, but a really productive edible shrub. So really wonderful, only needs 150 to 200 chill hours. So good for, those of you in zone 10. These are also self-fertile, which means it will produce fruit on its own. But of course, always with self-fertile plants, planting another one will only increase your yields. Another claim to fame on this is its beautiful foliage. It's some of the bluest foliage that you can find on a blueberry plant.
Oh, and
I want to just jump in and say all of these are perfect for the cutting garden. So florists and floral arrangers can, enjoy them in the garden, but also cut them to put in the vase. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this in our practice session the other day. The thornless blackberry is so popular among florists because it's easy to handle. Mm-hmm. And after you've eaten your fruit, you can use this foliage and it has a really long vase life. It has this really great pure green texture in a floral arrangement.
Wow, that is not, I was not aware of that until you mentioned it, Debra, but what a great way to think about getting, more out of enjoying the plant even more. That's wonderful. Well, let's go in a different direction from that juicy palette to something a little bit more soothing, which we're calling a wild touch of blue. And this is really based on a sense of really letting the garden feel and look a little bit wilder, and the use of texture and grasses, which we've really seen become popular, as well as natives, a growing interest that people have in natives, and mixing that sort of soothing, natural tone, creamy colors with blue and blue-gray and purple. Again, the overall feeling is one of calm and a sense of really letting nature kind of do its thing, and also creating a sense of a connection to, I guess, a wilder landscape, even if your backyard is, there in the suburbs, the sense that you want to have, a feeling of being near a meadow, and all that conjures up for us. And I think, we're seeing this mix of natural tones and blues. And when we talked, to Debra and Robin, they were seeing those happening kind of in different areas, but, also kind of coming together in the backyard.
Yeah, I would say absolutely that this is more, it's about, we're saying we've moved beyond the coastal grandmother phase right here. This is really more about natural palettes, prairie, coastal, high desert, foraging, widely curated, all of those things that are showing up as well in products. If you haven't noticed yet, but now you will, because you'll see it everywhere. Everybody is using a lot of natural products, a lot of wicker, a lot of natural foraging in their product displays for the summer. Like, for example, this World Market chair. This chair has been around for about 2 or 3 seasons now. However, it's usually been in like hot yellow or orange, and now we see it emerging in this kind of rattan, lovely feel that could fit right into any one of these landscapes. We also see a bit when we look at social cues, a bit of the Yellowstone influence too, that prairie influence, of not exactly everybody doing cowboy boots, but the idea that it's more natural. Debra, you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I do want to just say that this beautiful arrangement was designed by a Bozeman, Montana-based designer, Remy Bro of Labellum, and I love that she's added the grasses and the wild pheasant or turkey feathers to just kind of bring up that natural vibe. We are also seeing, Katie, you mentioned native plants. We're seeing flower farmers experimenting with growing natives as cut flowers. That's really been gotten very little attention, and it's such potential for regenerative farming and regenerative gardening, because the natives are better for the landscape, better for the pollinators, better for the habitat. But then the fact that you can, they're mostly perennials, you can grow them and still harvest from them every year for floral arranging.
And I just have to comment on that rich leather look of the magnolia leaf, which is just gorgeous. And you will see this all through if you go back to the palette that we shared. This isn't white. This is a richness of the landscape and nature.
So that brings us to some wonderful selections. Georgia, want to lead us through kind of the soothing palette?
Yeah, absolutely. So here we are starting with Russian sage. It sort of has this mix of both that blue feeling and the silvery look to this sort of area as well. We really love Blue Jean Baby because it's quite a bit more compact than regular Perovskia. If you are noticing a theme, we are getting all these classic plants and making them smaller to fit better into landscapes and make them more manageable for everyday gardeners. So Blue Jean Baby is going to top out about 2 feet tall, and therefore it stays much more tidy in the landscape. And then next to that is Santa Barbara Mexican bush sage. This is a wonderful plant for those in drier, hotter areas. Soft gray-green foliage, and then those sprays of bright purpley pink flowers are really quite gorgeous. Again, this is going to be more compact, so it's going to top at about 3 feet tall. Again, just much more tidy in the garden, and those flowers are beautiful, especially when paired with a white. We talked about magenta and white being really popular, so this pairing with Nitty Gritty white rose is beautiful. I really love the nitty gritties for this style of garden because they are a ground cover type rose, so much more sprawling and a little bit more free-spirited than some of the more shrub, formal cottage style garden roses. Nitty Gritty is going to be 3 feet tall by about 4 to 5 feet wide and have a ton of these beautiful spray type roses, all going to be self-cleaning, all going to be very disease resistant, and wonderfully they're on their own root as well. And what own root roses do is if you have a lot of stem dieback over winter, in the spring, what is going to come back up from your soil is going to be the variety that you planted. If you are getting a rose that's not on its own root, it could be the understock that you get after a hard winter, and oftentimes those are not the prettiest roses for the garden. And then below that is a beautiful ground cover, Sun Sparkler Dazzleberry Sedum, another wonderful drought tolerant plant. I really love sedum also. We talked about pollinators, and when these are in flower, wonderful for pollinators too. But really for this palette, it's about the foliage color here, those beautiful silvers and purples and blues that this ground cover really brings is gorgeous. And moving on then to grasses. This is a new one, a new switchgrass called Prairie Dog. I really love this switchgrass because it's more upright. It's a very clean and tidy. It doesn't splay open. You get that bluish green foliage, and then in bloom you get this beautiful hay colored flower, so you get this sort of natural meets this touch of blue in this really nice beautiful movement way. And then Elijah Blue Fescue for another little pop of silver here would look beautiful in any arrangement that you had in this style of garden.
Yeah, and I think that Elijah Blue Fescue is one of those really versatile plants that goes with so many other color combinations, and is just such a great way to refresh, a tired landscape right now. And it's, drought tolerant. It's works well in so many zones. It's a really, well, like I said, wonderfully versatile plant in the landscape. So switching gears and thinking about shade, we get so many questions from our subscribers about what to do with their shade garden. And I think one of the key trends that we're seeing is what we're calling luminous shade, which is where you're really introducing just a few key pops of color, bright yellows, lime greens, bright pinks, with, darker foliage plants to create this kind of color contrast, which is really eye-catching, interesting. I think, moving away from planting maybe a whole, mass of forest grass, but instead using forest grass, such as you see in the lower photo here, in a more judicious way, so that it really catches your eye and that you don't just kind of, gloss over it. Really love the container here on the left, which I think exemplifies this idea really well, where you've got the oxalis and the heuchera really pairing beautifully in this kind of moody container. And we know that a lot of heucheras with their bright flowers make wonderful plants for this kind of look. And George is going to talk about that in a bit. But let's talk about how luminous shade works as a palette in home.
Well, this is kind of funny. Before I have to say, I love the plantings in that container, but I want that container.
Yeah.
But what we really see is, we talked about gray for the interior is really kind of fading out, but outside it's still very popular and prominent. And we've seen that for years. One of the reasons is very practical. You can repaint a room a lot easier than you can repaint a house. So that you're staying with the gray for a while, but we also see this dark, rich gray really coming into a lot of modern homes. What's great about it is with the gray and the green, it's such a neutral for colors to pop. And you really want to see that, especially in the vestibules of homes, which is a perfect place for containers that you're demonstrating here, because it gets a lot of shade just by the nature of being covered. So it really offers that pop against a gray house. And also with a more natural landscape and with more grays and greens around, you really want to put those pops of color, even if you see that kind of natural landscape we just talked about, you know, adding in the pop of the front door with the pop of the plants. So I'll let Debra add a little comments here.
Well, one of the things that we learned through our color survey is that florists are amping up neutrals with shots of color. You know, it was just blush, blush, blush for so long, and we're just feeling such a joy that there is color. But you really need that contrast of the bright, like you see in the lime green. I think that's just a fancy leaf pelargonium on the left. You need that to make the dark colors glow. The dark colors alone look flat, and the same is in a floral arrangement. In the foliage department, we've got, every shade of green, burgundy, gold, silver, variegations. It sort of gives us an all season canvas. And we have our most of our ornamental plants in the garden are going to give us joy year round with foliage. The flowers are maybe only there for a few weeks. So in selecting this luminous shade, I think the foliage plants really are the stars.
It's really true. So let's talk about the stars.
I totally agree. And I think all of these plants that we're showing here, the foliage is going to be fabulous on these.
Yeah.
So the first is one of my favorites, is Japanese painted fern. Talk about a luminous plant for the shade. This is absolutely a standout because it has those icy blue fronds, super unique. And then the photo's a little small, but if you saw this in person, you'd see this beautiful dark purpley midrib. Just adds a little contrast to this plant that already adds contrast to so much around it. And then in the middle, of course, heuchera are fabulous foliage plants. We talk about coming in all sorts of different colors. I really love these dark purple leaves on Siren Song's Dark Night. This dark purple foliage I found stands up a little bit better to sun than some of the other purple varieties that we've tested. Robin, you talked about pops of color, and this will give you this beautiful pop of very deep pink, almost red when it's in bloom as well. And then another awesome foliage plant, really super unique, again from Dan Hinckley, who's a plant explorer that we work with regularly, is this tectonic Pangea begonia. Really deep, dark, highly textured foliage with that beautiful lime green stripe in the middle. It just bounces the light beautifully. It's hardy to zone 8, which it really doesn't look it. And they make great, if you're zone 8 or above, wonderful for shade plants in the ground, but also really nice container plants. I've had luck overwintering these indoors. So if that's something that you like to do, you could treat this as sort of a full-time container plant indoors or out. And then below is hellebore ice and roses. This particular variety is Bianco. Typically, hellebores have blooms that are going to face down, and the foliage often can be pretty weak and stringy looking in the garden. So, as Debra mentioned, a lot of times we're looking at the foliage. So we really want great foliage when we can have it. And Ice and Roses has deep, dark, lush, healthy, evergreen foliage. Looks good even when they're not in flower. But of course, those flowers are the star and really does add a big bright spot in the shade garden. And then All Gold is a Japanese forest grass, of course, another really versatile plant, great for adding a pop of bright color to the garden. Or if you're looking for more of a shrub with that yellow color, Banana Split is a new Daphne we're introducing this year at Monrovia. This is an improved variegated Daphne. It has a much brighter yellow and a much wider variegated margin on the leaf. So you just get more of an impact with that bright yellow color. And it's also shown to be a little more stable. So sometimes variegated plants can revert back to green, and this one really hasn't had that issue. And of course, the fragrant flowers with that slight pop of pink, really beautiful again for adding this luminous to the shade.
Yeah, and it's such a graphic looking plant too, like really catches your eye. I love too seeing that people are using more and more I'm seeing people using grasses in a container, just as a simple idea with a lot of texture and being able to move that around a garden. And I think having Japanese forest grass in a container, like you see here, is a really novel idea, just a fun thing to do. So we come to our final palette, what we're calling mini maximalism. So where did this idea come from? Well, as Robin said, there's a lot of sort of references in pop culture that, again, influences things that we're interested in, like the Yellowstone idea and the wild arrangement. This actually, I was thinking, is very much tied to the Bridgerton effect. The Bridgerton series on Netflix made us all sort of reverent for that era when, flowers and containers were over the top. And you see an example of this sort of mini maximalism in that striking container with the canna. That's, wow, bold and tall and just kind of dripping with color. And you see it in the lower left too, with the creeping Jenny, just this feeling of color and texture pouring out of our containers. And on the home side, seeing kind of similar things, Robin, that you've selected.
Well, yes, and I love this because I also want to say the mini is an important part of this maximalism.
Yeah.
because we realized, as we opened with, about economic concerns and all of those things that are looming on the horizon or may have already touched people. So the idea is that you can still have a really big impact, doing, as they say, doing more with less, right? So you might not do the whole garden, but a few well-placed containers can really add so much, just as a beautiful tablescape can add so much to the environment of a dinner party. And there's a great example there on the upper right. That is a recent tablescape by TJ McGrath it's at the Orchid Dinner at the Plaza Hotel 2 weeks ago, which was sponsored by Veranda Magazine. And he did this, it looks like it's just it's all structured underneath. There's all armature underneath to make it look like this vase is pouring orchids out onto the table. And it's all sustainable. It's absolutely gorgeous. And in the home, what we see are, once again, those pops of big statements like this. Mackenzie and Childs is always so wonderful with their whimsy, and this is just so, you could put that on your deck or on your porch or outside with one of the grasses you talked about, and you would still achieve that mini maximalism effect. And this has been around, like you said, Bridgerton. We also look at the Gilded Age as a reference, and especially the Dutch masters, which we're also fond of, and that shows up on everything from notebooks to cards to journals, because they were great at taking nature and making it look fabulous, right? And that's what this is about, just making a statement.
And back to the mini comment, I think that there is this current zeitgeist of selective luxury, as we are starting to witness a bit of an anti-consumerism backlash, and also a rejection of throwaway products. So the garden really is an antidote to that, where there's a permanence. And if you're going to invest in a container, do something outrageous like this and give yourself that a little bit of sizzle and dazzle and color. I just think this is a really fun category, and there's something for everyone here.
Right. It could be, modern or country cottage. It can be however you want, but the idea is to kind of go over the top in a container. So Georgia, you're going to lead us through some combinations for a container.
Yeah, so we've made, because it's maximalism, we have 2 pages of containers. And we've really gone with these bright pops of pink and orange and yellow and graphic foliage to make this as high impact as possible. So this first combo is starting with Nephofia Poco Orange, or Hot Poker. This is a super long blooming variety, so it's going to bloom from spring through the summer. It's also more compact, of course, because we don't want it to get super tall, especially if it's in a container. We want it to stay nice and tight. The flowers right above the foliage, and that foliage is this really beautiful grass-like foliage, so you get some great texture in there as well. And then also, just to note, great drought tolerance. I know that's something that people are looking for. So full sun, drought tolerant plant, Niphophia is a wonderful plant. Next is Garvinia Sweet Surprise Gerbera Daisy. Garvinia, the Garvinia series is a wonderful series of Gerbera daisies. These are the only true garden Gerberas, which are hardy down to zone 7. So oftentimes these are annuals, but these really are truly hardy to zone 7 and have wonderful garden performance. I also love that the flowers are big and there are lots of them, and they bloom spring through the summer and up until the very first frost. So a high impact plant here. And then Super Cal Petcoa. So Petcoa is sort of a weird name. It's a mix between Calibrachoa and Petunia. And that mix gives us, again, wonderful garden performance. These plants are going to stand up to the heat, the rain, the wind, the late season frosts, just really anything the weather will throw at them. Super large, showy flowers that are going to self-clean. And one of my favorite attributes is that they don't have that sticky foliage that you can have with regular petunias. The next combo is an example of how you can utilize flowers and foliage to create this sort of vibrant graphic combination. So we're starting with Jazzy Jewel Tropical Hibiscus. This is going to produce a ton of large, vibrant orange flowers from top to bottom. And they're going to hold on to those flowers for up to 3 days. Traditionally, tropical hibiscus will hold their flowers only for about 1 day. So that extra 2 days really does add a lot to your containers. And like I said, they just continually bloom. So you have long-lasting flowers and also many of them. In the middle here is Fiesta Pina Lantana. Lantana has a phenomenal bright yellow flower color. And what's great about this particular variety and series is that they're completely sterile. So that's great for those of you in the South where sterility is a key issue for Lantana. If you're not in an area where that's an issue, it's also great for those of you looking for wonderful flower power. So if Lantana is sterile, it's going to put all of its energy throughout the season into producing more and more flowers instead of putting its energy into producing seed. So you get a longer bloom time on this Fiesta Pina Lantana. And then we're using Maranta here with its graphic, bright foliage. Using houseplants can be a really fun way to create this unexpected combo in your summer containers.
And I love that the way this lantana is it can kind of cascade out and over, right?
Yes.
It kind of behaves great in hanging baskets. It's a great choice, but it gives your container more like almost like a gown, coming out underneath that hibiscus and the houseplant. I love that combo in particular.
Yeah.
And then
lastly, we are starting this combo with Diamantina Opal Yellow Mandevilla, paired with Enduroscape Magenta Verbena. Yellow is a really difficult color to find in Mandevilla, and this year they've come out with Diamantina Opal Yellow, which has that really clear, bright yellow flower. Like I mentioned, really hard to find and quite a cheerful color, especially for this sort of bright Maximalism container. Would look really beautiful climbing upward. It's going to be about 5 feet tall if you want it to be, so it can be quite the statement, or you can keep it more tame if you'd like. And then pairing that with a bright magenta with this Enduroscape Verbena is wonderful. I really love the Enduroscapes as a whole because where most verbenas are going to cycle out of flower when it gets really hot, Enduroscapes won't. They have exceptional heat tolerance and they will continue to flower throughout the heat of the summer. And then lastly is foxtail fern, which interestingly enough is not actually a fern. It's a member of the asparagus family, but this provides a really wonderful texture and another great option for indoor out. So if you're not hardy to zone 9 or above, it would be wonderful to have this outdoor when it's warm and indoor when it's not so nice outside.
And we grow a lot of these. And I think one of the things that we hear a lot of is just that ours are really full, and give you, sort of this instant payoff, even on its own in a container. Frankly, it can have that feeling of maximalism and abundance.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, I love that foxtail fern to make a statement. That's wonderful.
It's really nicely sculptural. Debra, anything you'd add to the maximalism choices here?
Well, I do think that we, the palette is just in line with what we're seeing in floral, where I just got off of a call with a bunch of growers, and they're seeing more reds and yellows in terms of cut flowers being ordered by retail florists this year than ever before. And I think it's just that yearning for something that will add joy and, just enliven our days.
Yeah,
Right.
Move on from the shades of gray, move on.
That's right. And not being afraid of color, not being afraid of really bold color, I think is exciting. Well, so if you enjoyed today and you want more, Monrovia has our new Shades of Beautiful guide coming out next week that has 10 palettes, including some of what you saw today, but other ideas to get you going for the spring. And Debra, Robin, you want to share a little bit about what is available from Bloom Imprint and Slow Flowers?
Sure. I love that our book, the palette of our new book cover matches the Shades of Beautiful. Not coordinated at all.
Right.
Go ahead. You wanted to say something here, so.
Well, just thank you so much for inviting Robin and I to share our insights. We have a lot of content that is available through Bloom Imprint and also the slowflowersociety.com website that is really for the flower lover. And gardeners get this. They understand the idea of living in the seasons and using what we grow to add joy to our lives. So our books, our magazines, our online content through digital, and the podcast is available for everyone to check out. And we'd love to have you sign up for our newsletter.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. And I think we have a little bit of time to answer some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen if she wants to.
Sure, absolutely. Actually, Debra, can you talk a little bit about what you mean by slow flowers?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. The idea of slow food has been with us for a long time. And if you're a foodie, you understand that idea of farm to table, of celebrating the local rancher or farmer or fishmonger. Like, where does our food come from and how can we consume it as responsibly and intimately with our location and our season? So we've really borrowed that term. And in 2013, exactly 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Slow Flowers. And it was my own exploration to see if I could make one arrangement every week for 52 weeks for a full year, just from my own garden here in Seattle, or what I could purchase from local flower farmers. And, that was, I was a gardener, not a professional florist or a floral designer. So I think everyone on this call can relate to that. We're yearning for that ability to bring the outdoors in. That kind of launched the Slow Flowers movement, which is now an advocacy and membership organization to promote local and seasonal flower farming, cut flower farming, and sustainable practices in floral design. And as I said, lots of free resources to check it out at slowflowersociety.com.
Excellent. Thank you. Katie, I have a question for you. We had a few questions about people asking about, can you tell us more about plants that do more? What do we mean by that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think of it as plants that maybe they're not just like a great example of this is the blueberry bountiful blue that Georgia talked about. That's not only a beautiful ornamental shrub and has, fantastic fall foliage, but gives you these juicy berries. So it also gives you wonderful edible fruit and looks great in the landscape all year round. Or, some of our plants that, as we said, attract pollinators, feed, butterflies and hummingbirds and nourish, wildlife that we all want to be doing in our gardens, but that also give us such beauty to enjoy and maybe even make wonderful cut flowers. So it's really thinking about your plant choices as more than just being pretty, but what else can they, do for your life? We were talking too about that connection to wellness and well-being that people are making with their gardens. And, you know, one of our research insights is that more and more people since the pandemic are saying that their garden is their connection to well-being, mental health. It's really important to them feeling good. And I think some of, you know, what we talked about with aromatherapy certainly does that, but it's also just, you know, connecting to nature, seeing something grow, and you know, enjoying your garden all year round too is part of that. Choosing plants, as we said, for the foliage as much as the flowers, so that we're aware of how plants change through the seasons. That's part of the doing more idea, and what that gives all of us.
So many great benefits to everything that we've talked about today. Georgia, we had quite a few questions specific to each of the plants that you suggested, and one of the main topics that people had were just a few questions about growing lavender, and I know you have a good tip for us on that. Can you share that?
Yeah, so really the key with lavender is to remember that it's a Mediterranean plant. So it's going to need very good drainage to survive. So lean, rocky soil is key. What we see people struggle with the most is trying to grow lavender in heavy soils or clay soils. And that's really when you run into some issues. So really recommending making your soil, even if you have to add some rocks to the bottom for drainage, making sure that you have excellent drainage and you have more of that rocky soil type.
Great. Katie, I'm going to send the last question to you as we're coming up at the top of the hour here. Lots of people asking specific questions on plants and where can they get them. So can you share with us a little bit about My Plant Finder? And
so we recommend Monrovia.com. If you go on our website and you click on My Plant Finder, which is right there at the top, you can enter your zone and the kinds of plants that you're looking for. Maybe you have a problem to solve in a landscape. Maybe you're just looking for orange flowers. Maybe you know a particular plant you're looking for. You can search by all those methods, and then you can see whether or not it's available for online shipping, where you choose a garden center that you want us to ship it to, and we'll ship you that plant. If it's not available online, you can see at least where there's a garden center in your area that's carrying Monrovia plants, and you can call them and see if they have it in stock or suggest that they do. But either way, it's a great way, I think, right now to look for plants. We are starting to ship plants right now online. So if you want to order and get it sent to your local garden center, that's my recommendation, is start with Plant Finder to find the plant that's right for you.
Such a wonderful resource for inspiration and information on, you know, specific plants. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. Debra and Robin, thank you for being our special guests. Katie, Georgia, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and join us next month when we talk about rare plants and the most valuable plants in your garden, and we'll be joined by Dan Hinckley. All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.